welcome you on the Lumen Travo Gallery. I'm very honored to welcome Christa Maria Lerm Hayes. I'm allowed to say Mia. For the ones who don't know her, she's an art historian and a curator, and a professor currently of modern of contemporary art history. I read it because otherwise I do it wrong. Okay. At the University of Amsterdam. The first time I met Mia was in the Merchant House. She was giving a wonderful lecture about writing and imaging, about James Joyce in relation with visual art. And it was a very intriguing lecture. It stuck in my mind. And I also heard that she was very interested in sculptures, in public spaces and in social interactions. So something thought it would be very interesting when my book was finished, Compassion and Paradox in Art and Society, and we were organizing a roundtable talk in Manifesta, Lumen Travo and Manifesta together, to ask Mia if she wants to participate on the table. And she did. And the way she entered these topics, who are dealing with flag of compassion, and the book was really fascinating. So there was, for me, no doubt when we made this show, Pietà, a reconsideration of the gesture, to ask her again if she was willing to elaborate on the topics I'm dealing with in this show. And she said yes again. So I'm really honored she's here, and I really like to introduce her to Mia, or to have a little talk. And I heard you made a kind of title of Affective Constellations, so I'm really curious. Okay, welcome Mia.
Thank you so much, Rini, and thanks to Lumen Travo also for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's an unusual situation as well that we're here in just a very small group and hopefully a larger group that we can't see. So welcome to everybody online. Well, you chose to research Michelangelo's Pietà in St. Peter's in Rome, and you made this lovely book with it, Roma Eterna, and you worked in Rome 3 months in the CNIR, where I also taught at some point already. And the subject matter is somber. It's a mother losing a child, and it's the only topic really I can think of that would call for or excuse, or whatever word one might use, for solipsism. A very decided sort of a move to close off. The mother and her child grieving, the world doesn't exist outside of that constellation. That you can't even say that it's two people. They are one because she gave birth to that child. So it's the image of concentration in a way, also in Michelangelo's work. And yet I thought of the term constellation, and I want to explain why I think it's useful to broaden out from this very, very core node, I suppose, visually the circle with the dot inside, the sign of the sun, this sort of thing revolving around itself seems to be a good starting point for me. And then a constellation moving out. Gestures, and also, constellations, I suppose, that concern affect and reach quite far. But maybe to start with that concentration, because you also, Rini, identified with this mother, because you recognized in Michelangelo's sculpture this gesture of a woman holding things on her lap, making something visible, holding up on show, which is the translation of the Greek word epiphanein, to hold up on show, epiphany, And here we are in a religious realm already. So you have photographed yourself in the past with various forms, various materials on your lap in a frontal sort of a situation. It's illustrated here, straw for example, or a kind of a cocoon shape that also has a little bit of a phallic connotation to it in a way. So there are various materials that you hold up, and you are the woman in a motherly gesture, really taking care of these things and making them seen by the people who view your work then. And so this identification is a little bit of a starting point, and this concentration also, because this exhibition is a very, very concentrated exhibition. It really only revolves around the mother holding her child and the life of an artwork, as we call it in art history, of Michelangelo's work, which was attacked in 1972 and had to be restored. So you are paralleling this restoration process, the other materials other than marble that would be added, plaster casts and molds, and these various techniques. Video on the attack and the restoration, and prints also of this press photo of this attack, where Todd, the attacker, is apprehended, and another group of people emerges, 9 you counted them, who are mirroring in a way the mother and son constellation. So the exhibition is a very concentrated thing, but with the title Roma Eterna, you are also going outwards. And I would like to take this sort of leap outwards, not just because I'm a researcher, but because you are one. You researched in Rome. I was a researcher teacher in the same institution, and you are an artist who obviously has a thematic interest. You called it compassion in the flag of compassion. Here it would be an empathic sort of a gesture, and affect seems to be a word that inhabits the same kind of sphere of compassion and empathy. So I made a couple of notes, because I was, and I want to say that your oeuvre therefore is not really driven by a medium, it is driven by that research. And you bring things from all over the place to a gallery such as this, to your subject matter. A flag can have fabric. Some other works in this exhibition also have fabric, and then you notice a cushion which you otherwise mightn't, also because of the color and so on and so forth. So the work has a stringency, a coherence in another way through this research. So when I was thinking about Michelangelo's work, your work, responding to all that has happened with the sculpture in Rome, I was inspired by Brian Massumi's work, Politics of Affect, and he uses Spinoza as a kind of a leitmotif, and Spinoza's definition of affect as being the capacity to affect and be affected. So that notion goes through the book, and this mutuality, the relationality of what happens. So that gives me license in a way. I think it fits very well with your work. Gives me license to draw these circles much larger. And then to read Roma Eterna as the title. There can't be anything larger than eternity. And Roma also, as the city of Rome, obviously refers us back to Romulus, the brother of Remus, who were brought up, fed from the mother's milk of a wolf. So relationships between mothers and boys and between human beings and material seem to come to the fore. So the material that Michelangelo in 1498 selected in the quarry was a big lump of marble. So we know that because of Vasari, the start of art history. It's the quintessential art historical work. I am not a specialist in Renaissance art nor Michelangelo, but I can research a few little things from that time that enable me to draw these circles to make those constellations. So we have the epitome of art history here. We have a time that somewhat complex, and we have an artist who went to a quarry to select a piece of marble. Now, if you read Masumi and work in this sort of realm of thought, then you might even go further than Romulus and Remus. You can go right to the formation of marble as well, from sandstone. It's actually called a metamorphosis of sandstone into marble, brought about by pressure and sometimes intense heat by lava nearby and so on. So then this sandstone with minerals and crystals and so on with fossils gets metamorphosed. So there were living things, there were objects, materials that change somehow. And I think that is a wonderful thing, and not just in general, but also in the context of religion. We've already had Epiphany, and it's the heart of the Vatican, obviously, in the most important church of the Catholic faith, where a metamorphosis is said to happen every time a host is held up and becomes the body of Christ, and the chalice with the wine, the blood of Christ. So a change in material is right at the center of all of this too. So we have marble, limestone metamorphosis, and crystals and so on, fossils, calcium carbonate. Sorry, I have to look this up because it's really well outside of my realm of specialization. So sometimes calcium carbonate from ground marble is also used in antacid medicine. So if there is something aggravating the body, you might actually ingest a little bit of marble to help you. I'm saying this partly to evidence that even stone acts in the sort of new materialism, Brian Masumi realm. One now places more emphasis on how also non-living things, objects, act in the world. So there was a mutuality also between Michelangelo going into that quarry in 1498 and finding a stone that answered to his wishes, and then of course he worked on it to make that grieving mother with her son on her lap out of it. And of course stone with St. Peter's in Rome and the foundation of the church as a rock, Christ saying to St. Peter, tu es Petrus, Peter, not saint yet, tu es Petrus, as in you are the rock on which I build the church. So there is a rock that is worked on in this church, and there couldn't be more emphasis on the centrality of this artwork as the epitome of not just art but also the Catholic faith, and right in the center of it all. Now, I already said that the time wasn't so unproblematic. Around 1500, less than 20 years before the Reformation. The church, that wasn't Catholic yet because there wasn't another, the church was all powerful. Really a very mighty apparatus of power, and it abused that power. It was no longer the group of disciples around Jesus Christ who were dissidents, I suppose you'd call them, and were persecuted and so on. No, it was the power of church and state and all together. So with Alexander the Sixth being Pope at the time, a Spaniard, we have a church apparatus that included, or the Vatican included, I only looked that up as well, it's also not my specialism, a group of loose men and women, kind of hinting at things that were happening there that were not so virtuous. So the all-male church apparatus, of course, did not just exclude women, but in positions of power, but also used people for their pleasure. And so Savonarola tried to warn the French king of what was happening in the Vatican, in the church at the time. He thought it was steeped in shameful vices and was, for his views, tortured and hanged. So Alexander the Sixth introduced censorship, for example, things that affected many people, and at the time Spanish people going after Columbus and so on to the New World were given an edict that these indigenous people there needed to be missionarized, and over a space of 90 years I found out the American Indians were massacred, 15 million of them. So before the Reformation, 1517, Luther made his demands on the church door in Wittenberg. There was a church that bought favors. Alexander himself seems to have gotten elected as Pope because he bribed everybody around him as well. So it was a very dictatorial and very unsavory kind of regime of dictatorship in many ways. So what I'm not saying is that Michelangelo was commissioned by the man who is responsible for the massacre of 15 million indigenous people in America. That is a difficulty to acknowledge that there is a parallel in here, and that this height of the epitome of art historical value is not to be divorced from all the pain and suffering that was caused. Quite often in the history of art we seem to think that people who are struggling, who are not in power and so on, produce the best work, and that societies that have a kind of a bit of contestation going on might be more creative in a way than societies that where power is secure, and whether it's benign or not, and for whom is an open question. But here we seem to have an artist who answered to the wishes of a church regime, to present that regime as empathic. So it was a need for this Pope, partly because he did all of that. He didn't ask Michelangelo what he should do with this edict or in any other way. There is a question about what money artists are paid for, with in all ages and in all countries. But it's clear that Michelangelo was commissioned to answer a kind of a need of the church, which was so unempathic, to show it as empathic after all. And that's also how I understand this gesture, the open hand that draws people in, the individual who is deeply religious at the time and who has no other way to escape the ways of thought in a way that they were taught. Where the story, the biblical story of the mother grieving for her child is brought into a public, made into a religious but also into a political thing, where the mother offers her son as a redeemer of all sins and so on to the world, basically. So we have something that turns this very private moment public, and also makes it something that can act as a foil for what this regime was like. It wanted to be seen as empathic and as having, everybody included, women and so on. I don't see that this woman is really the mother of a 32-year-old man. My son is only 19, and I think she is sort of young and attractive looking, maybe more like the people who the powerful clergy did have around them, the loose women in the Vatican at the time. So an attractive woman, and a woman who is generous, open, and draws the viewer in. Makes the core moment of Christianity, that this man has died and he will rise again, into something that also presents the church as open to vulnerability, as even being the victim, which it clearly was in early Christian times, and which it continues to want to present itself as. And I'm saying that because the attack in 1972 is something that was commemorated in 2013. There was an anniversary being celebrated in the Vatican of this attack, and I found quite a bit on the internet and so on. Obviously in 1972 the internet didn't exist as yet, but they made quite a big deal out of the attack and the restoration of the artwork afterwards in 2013 of all times. So the 41st anniversary, why celebrate that? Well, it was the time of Occupy, the time of many inquiries into child sexual abuse by the Catholic Church. I spent a lot of time in Ireland. The Ryan report came out in 2009 into how widespread the abuse of children was by the Catholic clergy, and how widespread the lack of action was in the church in response to that. Still some claim that church law is the only law that will be applicable to those crimes, and not the law of the particular countries. So 2013, that event, this attack from 1972, was being brought back into the picture so that the church could again present itself as an empathic and caring institution, as a group of people who were victims once maybe, and if victims of child sexual abuse, for example, survivors speak out, that is uncomfortable for the institutions, so this uncomfortable nature of the rightfully made allegations it turns the perpetrator into a victim as well in the views of some. Mm-hmm. So here we have a kind of a mutuality, a toing and froing, to go back to Spinoza's ability to affect and be affected, something that works back and forth. In 1972 even, the year of that attack, was a time in the height of the Cold War, where a lot of contestation was happening in Europe and in the world. I'm renovating a house from 1972, and I'm continuously reminded of the still existing promises of modernism, despite all the negative aspects of that, also destroying our natural resources and the lasting effects of colonialism and so on. The street in which this house is, that I'm renovating right now, is like the neighboring streets named after Nobel Peace Prize winners. Mm-hmm. One had this understanding that one wanted to be righteous. Mm-hmm. One wanted, after the civil rights movements of the late 60s and so on, one wanted to be on the good side of things, and yet that doesn't always, of course, work in black and white. But one is affected, one affects others, and I think, Rini, you're drawing these things together really beautifully. In 1972, in my Irish universe, is the year of Bloody Sunday, and the press photos from that, people with white flag and others carrying a wounded man. The Pietà isn't far from the press photos of every single site of contestation, wherever people die, in Syria or in every other proxy war going on right now. The Pietà is the photograph that every press photographer will take. So the restoration, and that is what struck me after 1972, was also a highly publicized thing, and the decision was immediately made that, I can't quote word for word, but what I read about it on the internet is that the decision for the manner of restoration was immediately clear. That when we sometimes want to show what is original and what is not, and let a work of art be incomplete, for example. That was not what the Vatican and its restorers were thinking. This epitome of art and Catholicism needed to be unblemished. It needed to be whole. It needed to be without any inkling of a notion of vulnerability, really, or reminder of the fact that it, as this focus point that it is, has served as also the focal point of aggression by somebody. So the aggression that might have led to its commissioning, the foil that it was for the Catholic Church around 1500 to show itself as empathic, and the marble is so beautifully capable of being translucent and not so hard and impenetrable. It's really quite remarkable how the stone works. So the restoration process wanted to cover over that moment of vulnerability, and that you unearth this restoration process, show something that is incomplete here, and make the photos of the attack also incomplete in a way by hiding certain parts in black or white, highlighting the composition of the place of the photograph, making the groups of people from the artwork and from 1972 separately visible, highlighting the attacker also as somebody who becomes in this moment a victim. That is really a very important achievement. So you are holding all of this up on show in your exhibition, and you told me yesterday that you also made a cast of the hand that will be able to be touched by people, that is lighter than marble, that can be shared with people in a way as a conversation piece, as an instance that goes from place to place, maybe private household or a gallery here or there, and that one can hand around almost like Lydia Clark's shapes that were conversation pieces, sensorial objects, she called them, part of an education and environment maybe. Show and tell is a nice format of education that I also like and employ, and something that can feed the conversation about these very broadly sketched constellations, because what I said here is by no means complete or finished or everything that can be said. So we're going back through your artwork to the research that you do, that all your audience members do when contemplating the multifaceted nature of this work. Great.